Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our LAFCO meeting of June the 8th. I will check for roll. We have Chris Skelton, right? And Dennis Rodoni, Jack Baker, Sashi McEntee, and Craig Murray, and our alternates, Lucius and Matt Graham. Okay, and we have a quorum. So first on our agenda is, if there's nobody that wants to change the agenda, though I will change one thing before we start. We do have labor negotiations here under closed session, and if no one objects, I'd like to continue that. Jeff Blanchfield, our chair, was involved with that, and he's unable to make it this evening. So if there are no objections, we'll continue that. And then at this point, I'll ask that we close, and we'll move to the next room for closed session and return here at 7:30. On our agenda, it's now time for open time, and that's for anyone that has any comments that they would like to bring to our attention that are items not on our agenda. Is there anyone here? Okay, then at this, we do have one person, and Jack Baker would like to add something.
A burning issue, I think. Burdick, who was 10 years.
Chris Skelton.
Anyway, Chris had a mishap at home about a month and a half ago. Tripped and broke, or I guess he tore his meniscus. Enough, and then 2 days later, he did the same thing to the other leg.
Oh, no.
And so I've visited him several times lately. This is his 6th week, I think, over enjoying rehab at a place called Kindred Transitional Care and Rehabilitation at the end of Smith Ranch Road, before you cross the tracks. Some of you may be acquainted with
Over there.
Okay. Anyway, he's doing well. He's in good spirits, and considering that he's can't get around and going through rehab, that's no fun. He's in great spirits. He's happy, and he's keeping his hand in with legal stuff. And as I've visited him a couple of times, he's had people coming in, and he wouldn't mind if he saw any of you folks, I'm sure. But he hopes to be out in a couple of weeks, but he's not so sure. It depends how the rehabilitation goes.
So he's actually staying at Kindred?
He's been there this is the 6th week.
In there?
Up on the 2nd floor, and it's all the way to the north end. Oh. And again, he's in great spirits. I don't know that I would be being there that long, so be careful when you're running.
I've actually had 2 knees.
So you're
My goodness.
familiar with this.
Wow.
Hurts.
All right, well, thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Jack. And maybe we can all either pop in, or I'm sure if we drop him an email,
right, yeah.
he'll get that too. Oh, see, that's what happens when you retire.
I see.
Oh.
Borrowed time.
Okay. Then we'll go next to the consent calendar. These are items that are ministerial. And if anyone from either the commission or any of our people present would like to pull anything for further discussion, please say so.
Item 9 and 10.
Okay. Before we go on, why don't we listen to what your concerns are on that?
Should we pass the other two and then, or the other items and then do that?
Well, we can do that. I was just going to listen to this and then adopt them all together.
Okay, so you just,
So I actually just wanted to hear from Keen on the Berea plan and the 4 LAFCOs that have responded back concerns in regards to.
So as probably all of you know in your other side job, MTC and ABAG have been going through a very, I think, thoughtful process in developing their new sustainable community strategy for the region. And so rather than issue a single letter from Marin LAFCO, and I apologize, the deadline was June 1st, so it wasn't, there wasn't really an opportunity to consult with the commission beforehand. Some like-minded executive officers, myself and Contra Costa, San Mateo, and Alameda got together and said, let's just write one letter. And that letter is in your packet, and essentially just kind of does the LAFCO missionary work, notes that, we're out here, and, there's in particular some spheres of influence that you might want to consider, and the relationship between spheres and MSRs towards the MTC ABAG growth strategy. So I think it's a friendly letter, and hopefully we'll get better feedback than the letter I wrote last year, which was crickets in response. So the 4 of us, and I appreciate Commissioner Connolly's on the MTC and ABAG? Okay, good.
Commissioner Downey is a.
Oh, well, there you go. So hopefully you will see our letter in a different form through the your staff that way. But again, I think it's just a good opportunity to connect the dots. We're a regional growth management agency. They're a regional growth management agency. Obviously, a little more better funding, but there you have it.
Thanks, Keen. So I appreciate that. I appreciate basically bringing forward LAFCOs and the connection with the regional planning folks, and that we all need to work on the jobs, housing, and balance, and the transportation.
Okay, and the other one, number 10,
Remember, that was item 8, right?
that was item 9.
Okay, may I speak to 8 just momentarily? The request by, is it CMS who's asking for a little more time? Yeah. Is that any problem with that?
No problem in the sense that, hey, it's a big document. We originally gave them 45 days, and then when they asked for additional 30, we talked, Rachel and I talked with Chair Blanchfield. It seemed reasonable. And so our hope is we come back to you at your next meeting with a final document and see where that goes.
Okay, thanks. And Ray, you had number 10?
So the next one is we have a new LAFCO brochure. I want to thank staff for doing that. That's really great. And I think this helps get the word out on LAFCO, who we are, what we do, what resources can be found online. I have a series of comments and what I'd like to show as online resources. We may not be there yet, but like to see, for instance, our meeting notice description, having a catalog of our enterprise systems. That's SB 272 documents, a local agency directory, a request for proposals as we have proposals for job opportunities, MSRS, SOIs, new legislation. And then I just, for the board's or committee's consideration, should we have staff in the photos too, so people know who Keen and Rachel are? I just thought that may be in order. And then again, balance of my comments are on this. I'll hand it over to the staff. Just some structural issues in regards to make it more legal. Thank you.
No, and just to follow up, so those comments are all welcomed, and yeah, this is kind of a living document, so as you take an opportunity to see areas of improvement, the neat thing about VistaPrint, which is what we used, we control it, we press print when we want to, so by all means, as the rest of the commission sees areas you'd like to see improved, let us know. But thank you, Commissioner Murray.
Okay, thank you. And then if there's no other ones that need to be pulled, I'll ask for a motion to adopt our consent calendar.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, anyone opposed? All right, that passes. And on to the public hearing items. The first one is about the reorganization of some lots on Summit Drive. That's located on Christmas Tree Hill in Corte Madera. And I kind of got a lot of chuckles out of this one. It's sort of like a who's on first scenario. with 4 parcels, but some of them go to Ross Valley Sanitary, some go to Santu, which is referred to here as Corte Madera Sanitary District. And then there's also question of a paper trail that possibly no one owns. And so it's really kind of an anomaly. And I will turn that over to Rachel
Thank
to
you.
explain it better.
It was a great introduction. So this proposal was brought to staff this evening by Corte Madera Sanitary District, and it's these 4 properties, subject parcels located at 238, 244, 246, and 260 Summit Drive within the town of Corte Madera. The proposal seeks to concurrently annex 244, 246, and 260 Summit Drive to Corte Madera Sanitary District and 238 Summit Drive to Ross Valley Sanitary District. Essentially, the proposal is a boundary cleanup. It wishes to formally authorize public wastewater services that were previously established through an unofficial connection. So, Vice Chair Condon mentioned before, so 238 Summit flows into Sanitary District Number 1, and it is billed by Sanitary District Number 2, Corte Madera. Now we have 244 and 246 flowing also into Sanitary District Number 1 by way of a lateral through 238 Summit Drive. 244 is billed by Sanitary District Number 2, but 246 is not billed by either agency. 260 flows into Sanitary District Number 2, and I believe it's not billed either by any agency. So essentially, this needs to be fixed and cleaned up. The affected territory totals about 4.5 acres. It's right outside the jurisdictional boundary of Ross Valley and Corte Madera. It is designated and zoned by the town of Corte Madera for low residential development. It potentially allows for 2 subject parcels to increase their density or residential units by, I believe it's 3 lots for 238 Summit Drive and up to 4 residential lots to 244 Summit Drive. Intensity improvements can be allowed for all 4 subject parcels, but this is already under current zoning. There are a few modifications that the commission needs to note concerning policy issues as that we would like to highlight. The first being there are sphere amendments to this proposed reorganization for County Sanitary District Number 1 and County Sanitary District Number 2 to include just to make this seamless, better collectively organized boundary, and also to establish or rationalize these existing relationships with current and planned uses in the area, and just to also improve the existing service commitments. The second modification is there is a parcel, a 1-acre parcel that's undeveloped just south of this affected territory. Unfortunately, staff does not know, it's undeveloped and we don't know the title of the ownership. So at this time, we recommend for the commission to not include this in the proposed reorganization, as it could initiate protest proceedings, and it would be an administrative burden, and it could affect the application. So there are more demerits in the inclusion than the merits to include it at this time. And then the last modification that I would like the commission to note is there's a memorandum that was passed out to you. And now this is referencing an adjacent strip of land just west to the affected territory. And staff apologizes for overlooking this. This was found right after the agenda report was published. It is approximately 0.7 acres, and it is locally referred to as the North Trail, Christmas Tree Trail. Thanks to Vice Chair Condon, she gave us a little bit of background and insight. I believe it was established right when the Christmas tree development was done, and it was subsequently abandoned because it wasn't maintained. So it should have probably been taken on by the town of Corte Madera, but it has been left kind of in no man's land.
Apologies, so it's up on the map so they can see this one red?
Yes. So ideally, the commission would take this land.
That at the bottom there? No.
It runs from 238, 260, and 246. You can't really see it in in this map, but you have an idea. It just runs right along west of that yellow block. Ideally, the commission would take this in because we also don't know the title or of ownership of this. It would, staff would have to do notification, and this could also, it would require notification, but since we don't know the ownership, who are we noticing? So staff requests that we work offline with Corte Madera, or excuse me, Sanitary District Number 2 offline, and return this to the commission for separate action. And the agency is aware and will bring this back. So this is our request. We also, but we do recommend, while it's not within the jurisdictional boundary, to encompass it in the sphere amendment because there's no noticing requirement for sphere amendments, and there won't be subject to the same issues. Also, just please note, for CEQA, I believe the lead agency would be the town of Corte Madera, and it has been, we believe it will be exempt. And with that said, staff wishes the commission to adopt the attached resolution and conditionally approve the conforming sphere of influence amendments to add all 244, 246, and 260 Summit Drive to Corte Madera Sanitary District Number 2, and all of 238 Summit Drive to Ross Valley Sanitary District. We also have Representative Landowner Peter Moak here, and he would take any questions that you have.
Rachel,
Rachel.
oh, sorry, just to clarify, Rachel, are you, the North Trail, you want to include the North Trail in the sphere amendment, but you don't want to include that other island piece in the sphere amendment?
Correct.
Same question. How do you reconcile that, considering they're both, I understand, unimproved and uncertain ownership?
So because we don't believe that, I guess it would affect the overall proposal, we would leave it out at this time. Because the strip of land is directly in line with the affected territory, we suggest to include it. Because if we don't include that strip of land, then how can we include the affected territory?
Are there any other questions for staff?
Follow up on that. So we're talking two different components here. So with respect to the sphere of influence amendment, as Rachel mentioned, we don't have to have landowner consent. We don't even have to notify the landowner when we move a sphere. So for the benefit of providing continuity to the Corte Madera Sanitary District sphere, which right now is parallel to that green jurisdictional boundary, we would just take it all in, including this little troubling north trail that we just found out about 24 hours ago. But for the jurisdictional boundary, state law says we have to notify the owner. Despite Vice Chair Condon's good efforts to help us find this owner in Corte Madera, we're still not sure who this is. It's not a parcel. It's not city-owned.
Sorry, now are you talking about the North Trail or the lower?
North Trail.
Okay.
So on the very south parcel that Rachel was mentioning, clarification. We do know the owner there, but the issue there is it's undeveloped. If we were to annex them, that means that they would go immediately on the tax roll of Corte Madera Sanitary, and they would have to be paying the user fee for a sanitary district when they're not receiving service. So it's cleaner for us to leave them out of this proposal altogether.
But why wouldn't they be included for the same, you've given us a reason to include the North Trail in the Sphere Amendment, but it seems like that reason should still, same reason should apply to the other parcel.
Well, it could, but, you know, we're not 100% sure. Mill Valley is right to the south. We're not 100% sure at this point whether or not it would make more sense for it to be in Mill Valley. So our comment is, let's just leave that one alone.
So the North Trail is firmly in Corte Madera, firmly in kind of the territory of that sphere. The other parcel is in a questionable, it's a question of where that would go, and that's why there's a distinction between the action requested for the two pieces.
We can move the sphere for the North Trail without any ugly boundary issue. Not so much for that troubling parcel to the south. That would be a little different for us. And again, we're not presupposing that eventually, you know, as part of our comprehensive sphere update for sanitary district 1 and 2, you don't come back and address it then. But we think you should address it then and not here.
So Rachel, it looks like 3 of the parcels are going to the sanitary district in Corte Madera. One parcel outstanding the trail and the remnant parcel. One going to Larkspur in the sanitation district serving Larkspur. Policy question is, does the dual annexation policy apply for that one parcel going to the Larkspur side?
No, since it's already in the incorporated town of Corte Madera, so it's incorporated.
Okay, so it might be similar to the Glenside situation where its area is not within that city or that jurisdiction, but it'll still continue.
Since it's within the town, then that.
They'll just have a different service provider.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's sort of not unlike a lot of issues on Christmas Tree Hill, where there's an anomaly there. Not too long ago, there was a similar strip of land that had no ownership. It wasn't maintained by the town, and what happened was an owner who wanted to extend its setback went to the county, went to the town, posted a letter for 30 days, and filed a quiet title claim and acquired the property, and then of course has to pay taxes on the property. But this was kind of interesting to see that some people have been, you know, living without paying any sanitary district costs. So anyway, is there anyone from the public who would like to address this topic?
Carla, just a quick follow-up. So we're not seeing on the map, but is there some sort of slope or something that or are the owners then of these parcels recommending that they'd like to stay within certain jurisdictions?
So we spoke with both agencies, sanitary district number 1 and 2, and they collectively agree, and it makes sense based on the slope for 238 to flow into Ross Valley. Otherwise, if it directed flows to sanitary district number 2, that would require a pump. And for the following 3, they slope down, so it makes sense.
Rachel, what's that red boundary toward the top right, where there's both districts in it?
That would need further analysis, but I believe.
That is, it looks like, and we have to verify the sphere in this entire area, but.
I think you have to get closer to the mic.
Oh, yeah, I apologize. So We're 90% confident in all of our GIS records, but here we had to do a little more research. Right now, GIS is showing that those 3 green parcels that are in Sanitary District 2 happen to be in Ross Valley's sphere. Now, that's what GIS tells us. We think this might be a mistake. So as part of our update that we're working on, we're actually spending quite a bit of time with Dennis Healy and others and trying to make sense of our paper maps reconciled with GIS.
What's curious, too, I'll just add, is that an old county address map shows those parcels with a different address than what's up there, which might explain why they were never billed. But nobody knows for sure. Okay, any other questions of staff? Okay, and for the public, is there anyone here that would like to comment?
Let's guilt Peter into coming up to the mic.
Okay.
I'm Peter Malcolm.
Okay.
Speaking back.
Yeah, wait till you get to the mic and your name and address, please.
Okay, my name is Peter Moak, professional civil engineer, 353 Pine Hill Road, Mill Valley, California. And it's good to be here. I want to thank Keen and Rachel for all their diligence on this. And I represent the homeowner at 238 Summit. And the 2 properties above there, 244 and 246, they go through his property. But the problem was it's such a steep slope, and there's offset joints. He's had a cesspool there in his backyard from 244 and 246 uphill from there. So that's kind of what started this whole process 3 years ago. And so he still has the cesspool, but that's the reason why we're trying to divert it down a shared driveway, divert 244 and 246 down the shared driveway to Sanitary District 2's manhole on Summit Drive. So that is the whole reason why I'm here, and that's what, why we want to do this.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll come back if there's any other comment that anyone has to make, or if someone would like to make a motion to adopt the resolution.
I move to close the public hearing and go with the staff recommendation of alternative action 1, adopting the attached draft resolution conditionally approved. Only sphere of influence, thank you, etc.
Okay. We have a motion?
Second that.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Now, is there a two-parter there, or just the one part? Just one part? Okay, good. Okay, and then we will move along. Our next item is about final amendments to the policies of outside extensions. And this goes along with updating the Commissioner's Policy Handbook. And Keen, would you like to?
Absolutely. Let me just go back here. So, thank you very much. So as the Vice Chair mentioned, this public hearing is for the Commission to take the last step in what has been about a year-long process in this Commission taking a look at your policies and ultimately trying to perfect them relative to your current preferences and priorities in administering outside service extensions in Marin County. And going a little further, for our purposes, this means tonight you're looking at what I would refer to as cleanup amendments to those existing policies you already have on paper that address non-fire protection services, things like water and wastewater. And then separately, and this has probably taken up most of our time, is the development of brand new policies dealing with fire protection services, which of course is the result of some recent legislation, Senate Bill 239. And so this evening, this item is for the Commission to essentially sign off on the policy and policy amendments that we've brought to you on both accounts. And if you take affirmative action, they go into immediate effect. I'll also note that since you last saw this in April, we did circulate notices to all local agencies. We posted on our website. We received some verbal comments, but nothing new. So that means everything you saw in April is 100% intact tonight. So that means with respect to the policies on non-fire protection services, water, wastewater, they remain entirely procedural, right? We've taken out from last meeting or 2 meetings ago any discussion about recycled water, so they're just procedural at this time, and this commission's interest in just prescribing how you want to see proposals submitted, reviewed, and ultimately acted on. So that's the policies on non-fire protection. Separately, the policies that you have on fire protection services, again, continue to stay intact, and they just focus in on how this commission wants to kind of narrow and drill down on this big block of cheese that the legislature gave you, and in particular, it's this commission's actions tonight to establish, among other things, local exemptions. So if you approve what's before you this evening, you would be exempting certain administrative contracts that you would agree are kind of outside the need to come to LAFCO, like ambulance contracts, like mutual aid, like permit and code enforcement. All these things would be outside then of your review process going forward. Also, we continue to incorporate almost verbatim the entire request that Corte Madera and Larkspur came to you at the last few meetings about, and that exempts fire service contracts that come to you in the form of joint power authorities, so long as certain thresholds are met, like labor has consented in writing ahead of time. And of course, as you may recall, staff in Corte Madera and Larkspur are agreeable to this, added a tweak to it saying, well, let's at least establish some kind of resident threshold and let's set it at 50,000. I will note, and Commissioner McEntee and Murray were quicker on this than staff, yes, we made an error in our math, and I'm embarrassed by that and how we got to that 50,000 resident threshold. And so we went back and we thought about changing it, but then we kind of liked the mistake. We liked the outcome. So our suggestion is let's just roll with it. 50,000 as a resident threshold's clean and easy. It's stagnant. We don't have to keep doing a calculation going forward. And again, Corte Madera and Larkspur thought that was agreeable too. So with that, this is for you to approve. And if, again, you approve tonight, it goes immediately into effect. But if you had any questions, by all means, and by way of policy, because you are changing policy, we did notice this as a public hearing.
Any questions of staff? Yes, Craig.
So Keen, thank you, and thanks actually to Corte Madera and Larkspur, the fire departments, bringing this forward and us helping them do functional consolidation, which I think is the goal. But I'd really like to hear, throughout California, have you heard, are other LAFCOs doing something similar, taking SB 239 and basically creating a situation that's unique to each county?
I think Marin is definitely in the lead on this. I know that San Diego LAFCO has adopted something, but they have stuck to just definitions. I don't know if they've gone down the path of saying, okay, what do we as a body want to just exempt from the get-go? So definitely we're ahead of the curve. But that's a good thing, because ultimately we're definitely responding to at least 2 agencies' interests in Corte Madera and Larkspur, who just happen to be in the process apparently of this multi-year process of creating a JPA when this bill was established. So that certainly motivated staff to get this before you sooner than later.
And thanks again. Recycled water, even though it's not an issue, necessarily issue this year, it will be in for coming years.
Any other questions of staff?
How did you reach the 50,000 resident number?
Well,
Seems
originally,
large for Marin
yeah, no,
County.
originally we just said, okay, what's 25% of the countywide population? Because 25% is the key percentage that Hertzberg used in his bill to decide when certain fire contracts come to LAFCO. And so that's how we came up with it. But then Commissioners Murray and McEntee shamed us in noting, you know, that's more like 20%.
Nice math.
Yeah, it was a little embarrassing. So, but again, you know, I think it's appropriate to have a resident threshold. I think it gets you a little closer to the spirit of what Hertzberg's trying to do. And it would probably only affect a proposal that is probably valley-wide, if not county-wide, which may come down the line. You know, I know that is a topic that LAFCO has an interest in looking at in future studies, which we'll talk about in a few items.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. From the public, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll close it then and bring it back. So this was just a report on this, right?
This is for action. This is for you to approve the red line version attached.
Okay.
And again, 100% intact from the document you vetted to some detail back in April. Nothing's been changed.
Okay.
I have one follow-up question of staff, if that's okay. Are there any JPAs that currently service more than the threshold, more than 50,000?
I would assume that Ross Valley gets close to that number, but that would be the only one I could think of. Now, back in the day when Southern Marin had some JPAs with Sausalito Fire and some others, maybe, but yeah, I think Ross Valley would be the only one I could think of.
Then I'll ask for a motion to adopt the policies.
Oh, go ahead.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, that passes. Kind of historic because I think this is the first fire JPA that is going through since SB 239 was adopted. Okay,
A lot of pressure now on Corte Madera and Larkspur to now actually come forward with this.
I'll say.
Yes.
Okay, and then our next item is the adoption of the final work plan and budget for fiscal year 2017, 2018. And basically, there haven't been any real substantive changes since April. There is a specification for 3 positions, right, on this one. And there is a monetary increase, which is due to non-payroll expenditures. Also, one thing that I'd like to point out is that this is the 3rd year in a row that we've had double-digit increases that have gone to the various jurisdictions. No one has complained about it. There's not been one complaint. And I think people realize that what hard work staff has and what good it's doing for the county. So I will turn it over to staff.
Well, I'll just, that was a great introduction. This is the second step of how you go about game planning for the upcoming fiscal year. As Vice Chair noted, you have a resolution before you that, if adopted, would do 2 things, right? It would set your priorities with respect to the projects you want to undertake in 17-18, and then secondly, it would adopt a budget to fund those projects. Since April, we did circulate both documents, which were tentatively approved to all 42 of our funding agencies, as well as our public members who have signed up for email notifications. We did get one comment from Strawberry that I'd be happy to go into more detail if interested. But in terms of changes, as Vice Chair noted, they're limited. There are 5 changes that we made to the work plan. If you take a look at attachment 4, Exhibit A, you'll see all of the proposed projects for the upcoming fiscal year that the Budget Committee came up with. And that includes something new this time. We're emphasizing kind of a top 10 list. And 2 of the changes I do want to highlight to the work plan made it into that top 10 list. So the first being, based on the recommendation of Rachel's Central Marin wastewater study report that you got in draft form in April, we are going ahead and scheduling a new high priority project to go ahead and consolidate San Quentin Village and Murray Park into Ross Valley. So that's going to take up some staff resources. And then secondly, and I know Commissioner McEntee's spoke about this, the merit at the last meeting, we've moved up in order of priority a contract review with CalPERS to at least look at what would be the cost benefit for this commission to potentially transition employee pension services from MSERA to CalPERS. So again, that was in the draft, but it wasn't a high priority. Now it's bumped up to the top 10 lists. So that's the work plan, and as the Vice Chair mentioned, the budget is pretty much the same with a little change that I'll get to in a second, but if approved, you would be moving the budget by about 5.7%. So you'd go from $526,000 to fund Marin LAFCO this year to $556,000 next year. The change that went in from April was just to address some revised insurance estimates. Now, what does that $30,000 buy? Well, it maintains the baseline, right? It maintains 3 staff positions, and then enhancements to non-payroll, most particular legal, right? Right now, we've been budgeting legal around $10,000 a year. That's proving to be challenging, so we're bumping that up, I think, to $35,000. So that's really the main change. So with that, I would certainly defer to the Budget Committee members if they'd like to add anything, but we do have a resolution for you to ultimately adopt after you open and close the public hearing.
Any questions of staff? Yes,
So
Craig.
again, thanks for the work on the budget and bringing it forward to the committee. That we really need to focus on that. On item 8, it's important. So we will build some capacity with staff. And Keen, I would like to hear your comments in regards to Strawberry. It seems like they have been reviewed 13 years. It would seem reasonable, particularly with some of their concerns of unincorporated issues, to review this again with item 8 being approved, hopefully approved tonight, and providing some more resources. Perhaps we can take a look at that.
Well, I could address Strawberry now if you wanted to take more questions. Okay, so Strawberry has been very patient, and they have some interest, as they articulated in their letter, that they ultimately like to see LAFCO weigh in not only on the service review, but ultimately perhaps explore some boundary changes and maybe even some latent power adjustments, all of which under state law need to be vetted through a municipal service review. Originally, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail in the next item, we were due to look at that region, what I call East Tiburon Peninsula, for the 17-18 fiscal year. But based on the recommendations of the policy committee to essentially better manage expectations, we've essentially said to everyone, we've got to move everyone back a year so we can catch up. In absence of that, we would have to really jump the budget contributions in order to, basically, do 3 or 4 studies next year. I did communicate this with the Strawberry manager. She's understandable. She has invited me to their meeting next week to explain myself a little better. But I think they understand that the way we do our studies, they are regional, and so it's not that we would just be studying Strawberry. We would have to be dependent on looking at least 3 or 4 other agencies. And so I think it's just kind of the cost of business of having a small LAFCO while trying to keep our costs down. And I think they're receptive to that.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I think the one additional year, they waited 13, that they're okay with. And it seems like with this really defined work plan, saying this is what we're going to do, then we're pretty assured that we'll get there for them. So thank you for that.
Any questions, comments?
This could,
Chris?
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
really quickly for Rachel, background education, and it might come up later in the meeting. How long does a service review take on your end administratively, tying back into the Strawberry issue? And you can use kind of the item that's being continued to August for the wastewater services as an example.
So for my first service review, the Central Marin wastewater study, that should have taken at least 9 months. And I believe it's been going on for 1.5 years now. I believe we can roll this out with 9 months for the next reviews once we have an additional staff person. I would also, if we can, do a small intern program to just get some extra help for small data research. But it should, I believe, it's doable within 9 months once we're back up with staff.
And we have 2 or 3, I guess 2 or 3 in 17, 18, is that right? Already on for the.
I believe, yes.
Yeah, and just to follow up, so the idea going forward is to calendar 2 studies a year. And Rachel's right. So the way we do a study, it's just not one agency. We're rolling in anywhere between 5 and 9 agencies in these studies. And they take about, ideally, anywhere between 6 and 12 months. What you have experienced, so for at least the last 2 years, since the water study was done, which was a project of the year, Commissioner Skelton, I don't know if you were aware of that, is Rachel's been on her own. I haven't really been able to provide, a lot of help on this, so that's, why we've gone 18 months with Central Marin. The idea, though, and again, this might bleed into the next item, you're developing stored efficiencies for your next cycle, the way we're doing these. So by the time you get to the 23 cycle or the 29 cycle, you'll have this repository of information that Rachel has generated for you. So we will start picking up speed just by that process as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
I was just going to check in on the MSR for Santa Fe, Lucas Valley region. Appropriately still in the top 10 list, I know. And do we have a time frame on that at this point? I think I also saw a note about some sort of community meeting or outreach.
I know the community outreach would be done in the phase of phase 1.
Right.
And I believe that would be during the draft report, but we're welcome to bump that up maybe before we even get going and start writing on it. I would defer to you with the timeline for.
Yeah, I don't think anyone will see a draft report on the what we call Santa Fe Lucas Valley probably for another 6 months, because we're going to have to work with the administrators first. And the goal is, of course, to get Central Marin wastewater done. For next year, we also have, and this is important, because I think at the next meeting you'll hear more about this, we are scheduling the other of the 2 studies is the Nevada region. And that is going to be somewhat intensive because we're going to be paralleling a general plan update, and there is some growing tensions between Novato and LAFCO, manageable, but some growing tensions between where they consider their urban growth boundary line versus where LAFCO designates their sphere, and then the service districts are kind of in the middle of that. That's going to be an intensive discussion. So you have 2 studies next year that start, just next month that are going to have some interesting issues. And I know Commissioner Connolly has already given us a good heads up about the, kind of the history of the Lucas Valley, Santa Fe. So you're going to have some interesting discussions there.
Yeah, I think that goes to Rachel's point. Maybe even some that upfront outreach could be valuable, I think. At that time frame, something.
Any other comments? Then I'll go turn to our public members. Anything? No? Okay. I will close that and bring it back to you to adopt the resolution of Marin Local Agency Formation Commission adopting a final work plan and budget for fiscal year 2017 and 18.
I have a quick deliberation comment for the commission. Sorry, I was waiting until after public comment, but I wanted to ask, this is my first meeting here and getting into this, the amount allocated to legal services. Saw in the footnote of 176 that there are some basic assumptions that are being applied. We're looking at getting a new independent legal counsel. There's also an assumption of maybe some carryover or mentorship that follows through from county counsel. And then in addition to what I guess has been now expected but historically unexpected outside counsel assistance, is the allocation reasonable in light of, I guess, the known facts should the allocation potentially be increased or modestly to respond? And again, I'm sorry, the subcommittee and all the work, I know there's tons of work that goes into this, and I hate parachuting in at the last minute. But I wanted to ask that question of the commission, who might have more background experience.
Okay. Keene, would you like to respond?
Well,
to
very
that?
quickly, and I'll defer to the budget committee members who like to add on, but our legal had been a discussion point about what is the appropriate funding level given the known costs that went into this year. We came up with 35 as kind of a midway point to what we thought our expenses would be this year, assuming our expenses this year are kind of the high outlier. But you know, LAFCO is vulnerable at any given time if we were to be involved in a big litigation. We don't have reserves designated per se to legal. That's something that I know the policy committee is going to work on. There is a nice, I wouldn't call it necessarily a safety net because we have to pay back the money, but state law contemplates an individual LAFCO needing an emergency loan. So the good people who came up with LAFCO law have a statute that says the county shall provide LAFCO a no-interest loan, or I think a low-interest loan to be repaid back in like a 10-year period, and there's no questions asked. So if you ever got into that point, there is a mechanism. But it's certainly, I think, something that I know Chair Blanchfield has been concerned about, and I would defer to the committee members if they had any other thoughts about whether that number maybe going into next year should be going a little higher.
Just curious, in that unlikely event, I hope that you ever have to pursue that with the county. Are they aware of that? Have they had any discussions?
I don't think I've ever actually communicated this directly because I hope it never happens. Yeah. And I'm guessing it would probably be one of those discussions that would have to take a multiple dialogue with. But it is there, and I know that there are a few LAFCOs who've had to exercise that option. To my knowledge, Marin has never done that, to my knowledge.
Sorry, a low-interest loan from the county or from the state?
Oh, no, from the county.
From the county, okay.
I'm sure Commissioner Conley will discuss this with Mechanism.
I just wanted to comment that, and in general, we do manage a reserve for those sorts of things. I think it's 132.
You have an undesignated reserve of about 140 right now.
Okay. And that's sort of the feeling, I think, of the previous budget committee was that we do have a cushion for normal activity. Abnormal activities, we get hit with something like that, it's going to absorb our entire reserve.
Okay,
So
thank you.
one other thing for our new public member, Chris. So we have discussed this in the past too. Should we have an attorney here at each of our meetings with the meter running, burning time, burning our budget? And I think collectively we said no, and this would be more project-based. So I think the 10 items or workflow that we've discussed, that we agreed, at least the budget committee, that this would be a reasonable amount, but it's always hard to forecast what other projects may come in. But it seemed, at least I can speak for the budget committee, that this was a reasonable approach, and we're doing certain things that perhaps other local bodies don't do, like not having an attorney here, but on an as-needed basis that we have services.
We have our attorney.
I was going to say. We have two attorneys here.
Okay, any other comments or questions? And to our guests this evening? No? Okay, then again, we'll go back to the motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
Thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes, and I want to personally thank the Budget Committee for all the hard work to get this done. That is really a task. We'll move right along now to the draft report on the Comprehensive Sphere of Influence update for the North Marin Water District. Here we'll have the opportunity to review the changes that have been made to the sphere of influence as part of the 5-year update process. We can talk about, decide, should we extend the service areas? Is it satisfactory the way it is? Do we need to make any changes? So, Keen, I'll ask you to continue on with this.
Well, very good. And I want to first thank new General Manager Drew McIntyre for hanging with us, and I know he'll have some comments for us in a bit. But as Vice Chair Condon mentioned, this is the first of really 2 defined steps that LAFCO has started with respect to meeting your work plan for this current fiscal year and completing your scheduled sphere of influence update on the North Marin Water District, a governmental entity best known for providing public water to the city of Novato and the surrounding unincorporated lands, and of course the governmental entity that Jack Baker calls home, and don't think that has not been on staff's mind as we tread lightly in preparing this document before you. That's true. We have 2, one current, one former North Marin Water District member here. So this is part of your relatively new responsibility, right, Commission? So as of 2008, the legislature expects that every 5 years or so, you are to sit down and look at all of the local agencies' spheres of influence and decide for your own purposes, do any changes need to occur in terms of how you want to define what is the agency's appropriate current and future jurisdictional boundary, and this is the important part, and service area. And the reason why I say and service area is because the definition of a sphere of influence was changed sometime in 2000 to emphasize not only are you to demark what you think is the appropriate jurisdictional boundary, but service area. And I'm going to come back to that distinction in a bit. And of course, the connection under state law going further is whether it's city, town, or special district, with limited exceptions, they can only seek the annexation or seek your approval to provide outside services to lands within their sphere. And again, unless there's a very limited unique circumstances. So that's the teeth to the sphere of influence determination. So with that in mind, what we've brought to you tonight is a draft report that takes a look at North Marin Water District sphere relative to not only your policies, but all of the things that the legislature prescribes that you think about when you go through this process. And of course, we kind of set the ball up last year by completing our source document, which is the countywide water study. And in addition to that, doing some supplemental analysis, we've ultimately come up with 3 study areas as part of this draft report that are reflected on this map that we think, to different degrees, albeit, merit your attention and perhaps even consideration of adding to the existing sphere of influence. And very quickly, A1 is right outside of Point Reyes Station. B1 is part of the Oceana Marin subdivision in Dillon Beach, and then B2 is an area that falls north of Marin County boundary, but just south of the city of Petaluma. Now, let me just jump right to some conclusions, and what we're looking for from the Commission is your feedback on whether or not you think the draft analysis at least meets your working expectations. And if so, great, and we can proceed with a public review process. If not, tell us what you want us to work on, and we can do that too. But in terms of our conclusions to date, we think one of these 3 study areas is good to go now in terms of being added to the sphere of influence, and that is what we call A1, this Point Reyes Station area. It's about 2,300 acres in size. Consists of a little less than a dozen parcels, all of which, for the most part, are under active commercial ag use. And this is the key part for LAFCO purposes, they already have, for the most part, contracts with North Marin Water District for water service. And these are contracts that the district entered into many years before this type of thing became part of the LAFCO purview. And it's that context that staff says you know what, relative to the way the state defines spheres and relative to your interests, we think it makes sense to add all of this study area A1 into the sphere now. Not only would you be reflecting and in many ways under state law legitimizing this as the appropriate service area, but in a kind of an off-centered way, you would be meeting your core objective, which is to support agricultural viability in this particular part of the world. So that's our general conclusions on A1. Now, there's also merit to the other two study areas, Oceana Marin and South Petaluma, but as we hopefully have provided in the report, there are enough outstanding questions that we don't think it's ready for prime time. So what we have attempted to do in this report is just document that there are issues of interest to LAFCO and to signal ahead to North Marin and to the affected communities that we'd like to come back to this topic as part of our next 5-year review, and hopefully we have signaled enough to those, to the agency and to the community to be prepared to have that discussion. Said a different way, we're planting a seed in hopes of future harvesting. And I think that's consistent with the direction we've heard from the Commission over the last 2 years, is use these studies as telegraphing agents to develop some organic support, or at least not surprise anyone when we do some sizable changes. So that, in a nutshell, is what staff has come up with to date. Again, this draft report, if you think it's lacking, we can certainly go back to the drawing board. I know that you all had received a comment letter from Drew, thank you, that provides some helpful feedback already from the district. Staff is certainly going to work with North Marin on vetting. If we've misstated anything, we'll work with them. But this is a good start, and I know Drew's here to perhaps provide some comments, but this is also really an opportunity to get your initial feedback, and ultimately, if you're okay with us starting the public review, I do have some questions to the Commission and maybe a little later about the extent of the public review, and also if there's any interest in talking about the world of conditions as it relates to spheres. But this may be something that you might want to pass on, but I'll leave that for you to tell me.
Okay, first, just questions to staff.
Carla? So Keen, just kind of a high-level review. There's some non-contiguous areas noted there. Will you speak to those and why they're not connected, or how they best could be connected? Or it doesn't seem to make sense that they're just going to out by themselves.
And I should have done this earlier. So let's just talk quickly about the baseline. So when you see this map, the red is the existing jurisdictional boundary of North Marin Water District. It's probably better reflected in the map for you. The dark red line represents their existing spheres. So just based on that, there's a couple of unique characteristics. For example, all of what we call Marshall it's in the boundary of North Marin, but it's not in their sphere. So your predecessors many years ago already made a decision that this should be detached. And as we provided the report, we're doubling down on this. We think it should be detached, and we could go in more detail on how we do that. Same with the section of the district that is just north of Point Reyes Station. It's in the district, but it also is outside the sphere because your predecessors back in '83 correctly said, well, wait a minute, this is Inverness Public Utility District. Why is there an overlap? So the signal from '83, which again we're doubling down, is this should be detached. And that's a whole different discussion about how we could perhaps help with the detachment proceedings. But the reality is, yeah, you have essentially 3 or 4 distinct jurisdictional sections of North Marin Water District. And they, for the West Marin, reflect, I guess, development expectations that never really came about.
To follow up on that question, in figure A1, you have an island and a peninsula. And why are they not included in the sphere?
So A1 reflects, with some exceptions within the middle of A1, and you can't really see, there's a couple of really small parcels that are buried inside of this mass. A1 is purposely reflective of those parcels that are explicitly connected to an outside service agreement. So the properties that we didn't catch, for example, there's that island, as you commented, to the north of the green boundary and south of the existing boundary. Well, that's A, not currently served by the district, and the part to the north is part of the district we want to get rid of anyway. That's part of the Marshall section that, in a perfect world, Drew would be here tonight with a detachment proposal, and we'd start working on getting rid of that. So that's why we haven't included any more.
What about the peninsula? As you, is that what you meant as part of the Marshall piece? Sorry, I didn't understand that.
To the northeast of Green, surrounded by Green.
It's not quite an island because it goes off that way.
So you remember the green was never included in the sphere originally? And some of the history around that, it has to do with the people that formed the water district and pushed it to be part of North Marin. They were property owners in Marshall, and so the vision was they eventually would be served by this system or some other water supply. And so I think that's why there was a gap, was that it was sort of a self-interest sphere.
This was back in the 60s, early 60s, something like that.
When North Marin first went to West Marin.
Long before the GGNRA and the Great Seashore.
Jack, make
You
sure
guys
you
have to
lean
come up to the
forward.
mic, yeah.
Thank you.
Long before there was a GGNRA and Point Reyes Seashore, politics had changed, the jurisdictional things have changed enormously out there, and I don't see that North Marin is ever going to be going up to serve Marshall or any of these little coastal communities out there. I know Dennis has a comment. He lives out there. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but that was a different era. As well as I think Drew said a moment ago, that Drew Keene, for some odd reason, we seem to have Inverness in our sphere of influence. Is that right?
Not in your sphere, but in your physical jurisdictional boundary. And then just going back to Commissioner Brown's comment about that peninsula, and I didn't catch your question at first. So that kind of land that we did not capture that lies in between the green and the bay, if you will, that's State Highway 1. That's all public right of way. For purposes of, map making, we certainly could include that in the sphere. In fact, there may be some benefit if, in fact, we confirm with Drew that the water line runs along State Highway 1. That actually might make sense, too. So that's a good comment for staff to come back to.
Any other questions?
And I guess in a moment, when the time is right, you're going to invite Drew to speak
Well,
to this.
I wanted to first get
Sure, thank you.
questions from the commissioners.
Maybe you could just comment about the de-annexation process, so that I know we can't instigate it evidently, but could you explain that?
Yeah, so the baseline is state law sadly cuffs the commission's ability to initiate certain proposals, annexations and detachments notably. So in this particular case, and we doubled down on this not only in this study, but certainly your predecessors contemplated this, we would like to see Marshall in what I call North Inverness detached from the district. Now, in order to do that, we need an initiating party under state law. That could be the district, could be North Inverness for one, but most likely North Marin Water District being the ideal applicant. As a substitute, landowners, registered voters can also be applicants. I think when we were doing the water study, certainly we had talked about exploring the idea of special legislation to do a cleanup. When I approached Senator McGuire's staff about this, they weren't interested in going down this path, at least not right now. I think we used up all of our juice with the senator over our JPA bill, so I think maybe he's a little LAFCO tired at this point. But those are options available to us. And the commission then has options to encourage us. If you wanted to signal to North Marin or a party that you want to help them on this, you have everything from looking at how you want to reduce, waive your fee schedule, how you want to direct staff to do some community outreach. So there are options that we can go down the path on. But ultimately, we need an applicant, and it can't be us.
If the detachment does not happen, what is the effect on the agency?
Well, the status quo. And I would defer to Drew to maybe speak on the district's concerns about that. I could say from a governance perspective for LAFCO, right now you have people who are in North Inverness or in Marshall who there's this disconnect where they get to vote on board elections and everything related to the district, yet have no real skin in the game. And then there's this expectation. What does it mean if you're in Marshall and you know you're in a district? Does it create an expectation that LAFCO and North Marin will work together on figuring out a way to get a water pipe up there? So the expectation issue, I think, is of a concern to LAFCO as well.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'd like to turn to our guests. If you'd like to make some comments, that'd be great.
Good evening, Madam Chair or Vice Chair, fellow commissioners. My name is Drew McIntyre, General Manager, North Marin Water District. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to discuss this issue some more. As Keene mentioned, we do have a response letter that we'll work with LAFCO staff to go over some of the questions and comments that we had on the draft report. I'm not going to go over all the items here. While I'm here, as you're looking through the report, if I don't discuss something that you want to ask questions on, by all means, please do so. I'd like to go over some of the comments on my letter first, and then I'll circle back with some of the other discussions that I've heard about detachment, if that's okay. You know, the focus really on our comments has to do with just getting an accurate assessment of our different service territories and what we currently serve and what our outside service arrangement is. And so the first one really of immediate concern has to do with the category A. That would be what LAFCO is being asked to consider to actually take immediate action on for sphere of influence expansion. That's the A1 area, the area in green. That's north of our Point Reyes station. We do, in fact, serve these existing agricultural parcels from our existing water service or system. It's important to note, and I do so in this letter, that the service that we provide, we actually master meter those customers right at the end of our service territory. So the area in green where we have outside service customers, just be cognizant of the fact that all the water lines in those areas are private. We do not own those. So some other outside district boundary service arrangements might have the agency's facilities providing that service. But these are private lines, and it's something that we inherited when we took over that system in the early 1970s. So our comment has been that we would continue to maintain this atypical service arrangement as long as there wasn't any expansion of capacity or expansion of dwellings, et cetera, on those individual parcels. We would continue in this atypical situation with private lines. If the sphere of influence is expanded, I think it accurately identifies that we are serving those customers, but I wanted to be clear that if it was going to go from a sphere to actually a service territory expansion, that the existing customers in Point Reyes Station would not be burdened with trying to put in all the infrastructure required to serve those outside customers, and that would be a requirement for those outside customers. So,
What does master meter mean? What does that mean?
master meter essentially if you look at the map, right at the intersection of the red and the green blob, if you will, that's where our existing facilities stop. And right at that location where we transition from our service territory to that green boundary, we have a meter, which is a master meter, meaning we serve multiple parcels through that one meter. So we call that a master meter. And then everything downstream of that meter is all private lines. And Keene, the private line does run in State Route 1. So I would envision if there was going to be an expansion of North Marin facilities, it would also be in that line as well. The other comment that I make related to this proposed sphere expansion is that it's our understanding that case law essentially says that if the sphere of influence is going to be expanded, that LAFCO is the lead agency in that effort. So I just want to make sure that point is made as well. A couple other comments related to the ones where Keene is essentially saying that you know, the seed has been planted and we'll see what grows at the next time that in 5 years from now when there's another update on the sphere of influence has to do with the you know, the B1 and B2 areas that Keene spoke to. I'd like to talk briefly about the B1. That's in the Dillon Beach, Oceana Marin area. Some of our comments will work with staff as just to clearly delineate that the area that you see in B1 that's in blue is what we essentially call the older Dillon Beach community. That was established in the around 1910, 1920s. The Oceana Marin subdivision that we ended up serving for sewer service, again, not water service, that came much, much later in the 1970s. Completely different community there, much larger lots. We have had one extension of a sewer line in the blue area that happened about 20 years ago. And because of that extension and the old Dillon Beach community, what we have said is any of the other parcels that are along that sewer extension initially was paid for by one person. And it was a long line, and there was a gap between that person's home and our existing infrastructure. So in that gap area, we essentially said that we would entertain other parcels that front that sewer to connect, but we would not entertain any additional connections. So you can see there in red, there's kind of some bleed over into the blue area, and that bleed over was due to that sewer line that was extended. But we have on many times essentially sent a letter to the county letting the different agencies know that North Marin would not consider any more piecemeal requests for connection to our system for that old Dillon Beach area. It's just too difficult, too onerous to do on a piecemeal by piecemeal fashion. And we have essentially said that we would, if the community came together as a whole, and you know, a study was made and there was a consensus from the community to look at connecting to our facility and funds were identified and what have you, that would be looked at that time. So that has been our policy for many years now, and it's just important to recognize also that the existing Oceana Marin subdivision was not designed with the expectation that the old Dillon Beach community would be added to the system, and it does not have the capacity at the current time. And then finally, just the B2 area, which is north of Novato. It essentially goes along the corridor where we have our aqueduct. Again, 80% of our water for North Marin comes from the Russian River, and the aqueduct runs along Highway 101, and many of the customers that have parcels there along the aqueduct essentially ended up getting service from us for outside water service agreements when we extended that pipeline down in the early 1960s, and that was really the genesis for most of those outside service arrangements up in Sonoma County.
That was a byproduct of right-of-way acquisition to build
Yes,
a
a lot
pipeline.
of, a lot of the right-of-way acquisition was such that it was all done by condemnation, and some of the final outcome with the courts, et cetera, is that services would be provided as part of compensation for those parcels as well. So again, we'll work with staff on some of the other comments on the
But
letter.
you mentioned here, Drew, that in terms of the district's desire of sort of withdrawing from our services up there as the opportunities come up. I don't mean to be answering for you, but speak maybe a little bit to Petaluma's role.
And the very northern part of our aqueduct and what's essentially termed the South Petaluma Boulevard industrial area, if you're familiar, that's right, it's that commercial area right before you get to the Petaluma River. It's where the Novato disposal solids handling facility is. It's where the proposed Dutra asphalt facility would be located. Team Gelati and some other locations there. That area is obviously very close to the city of Petaluma. We've had discussions with the city of Petaluma for many years in turning those customers back over to them. They were actually part of the city of Petaluma for many years. I am of the opinion that I think we're getting close. Those are about 10 customers in the very northern area of this corridor. That we hope then to actually have transferred back to the city of Petaluma. So that would lower the total head count, if you will, on those outside customers along this corridor.
Far north, we're crossing on a one to that point, or does it go? I noticed there's some industrial properties on the north side of the undercrossing or the overcrossing.
Right, that's all in, no, that's all in this, that's all in the city of Petaluma already.
So in effect, it's south of the 101 overcrossing?
Yeah, it's essentially, you know, if you, the new South Petaluma Boulevard exit off-ramp on the freeway on 101 when you're going north, if you exit that, take that exit essentially and come on the frontage road, it's those commercial establishments right there on the frontage road, very close to the Petaluma River. Schollenberger Park is to the east of the river in that cluster of developments there. Any other questions on the response letter before I go to a couple other items that I heard in the discussion about IPUD and Marshall?
And then do continue on.
Yeah, the service territory overlap with IPUD is unusual. And going back through, I obviously have not been with the Water District long enough to have the direct history of that. I can tell you that looking back at the files, there was some discussion about actually some sewer service in the very northern area of the IPUD service territory. And with that discussion, I think it could have been one of the driving factors with the service, this overlapping boundary there. And as it has been discussed with Marshall, that was going back many, many years ago when there was talk about a lot more of intensive development out in West Marin, and the idea thinking that there was, with a big increase in development, that there would be the need to provide utility service, and that obviously has never materialized in Marshall. So these are two areas that we've looked at. We've talked about detachment. Quite frankly, you kind of weigh everything else that's going on in terms of trying to prioritize where is this in the list with everything else right now, and it's not a pressing issue for North Marin Water District, but it is something that we have expressed an interest in trying to deal with at some point in time. So.
What services does Inverness PUD provide?
They provide water, fire. Dennis, I think, yeah, just water and fire. We do have we work very well with Inverness PUD. We have an interconnection should there be a need to exchange water in an emergency. So the fact that we have this overlap from a daily O&M and interface with management is not an issue at all. It's more than anything, as Keene reported, it's a little bit unusual from the politics of, voting and who are you voting for within your district. So we have some folks that are voting for North Marin Water District's directors that actually don't receive any service from us. No,
Petaluma area,
what's that?
just in the Petaluma.
Oh, up, down, over and down in West Marin, Inverness.
Provide sewer to some of those customers?
No, in Inverness, I was just saying way back, there
Okay.
had been in the file some discussion of sewers.
Oh, that was a discussion?
Right.
Okay.
And that could have been the genesis maybe of why North Marin would have had our service territory is overlap up with IPUDs.
Right now, in the overlap territory, they provide the water?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't, right now, in that area that's within Inverness Public Utilities District, water and fire protection, we don't provide any services at all. You can see, actually, the delineation with the sphere of influence line that's in that map there. That's kind of where our services stop.
That line that's across the bay?
Yes.
The dark red?
Yes.
Hard to see on the red itself.
And your facilities extend to that area, or?
Excuse me, Matt, lean into your mic, please. Thank you.
Your facilities extend all the way out to Inverness, or are they on wells or something?
Our facilities extend to the limits of that line on the south side. As soon as you go to the north side of that line, then it's Inverness.
We have an emergency pipeline, and that kind of raised some eyebrows because people didn't, to my knowledge, Dennis may have more insight to it. A lot of people up there were nervous. They did not want to have to reinforce their water supply. And so it was guaranteed that this, unless they request it, there's a big fire, God forbid, or something like that. It's only there for emergency purposes, not to augment their existing wells and other sources.
So those are really the questions or comments that I had, unless there's any other questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll close it then, bring it back to the commission for any input, direction you want to give staff on this.
Can I make a comment or two?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
I just wanted to make a couple comments because Keene and I had an opportunity to spend about an hour together. And because I spent 21 years on this board representing West Marin, I do have a little bit of knowledge. But first of all, I wanted to mention that Petaluma service, perhaps we could cooperate with North Marin and Sonoma LAFCO to get that service regularized. I've tried for years with Petaluma City Council, mayors, several mayors, and other council members to get this cleaned up. And so perhaps some interaction with Sonoma LAFCO and would help move that along. And the reality is that Petaluma should be serving most of those customers, not us, and I think that would be helpful. Related to the Point Reyes Station, I don't really have a problem with the sphere of influence being extended to the people that are outside water users, but the real issue and the thing that I hope LAFCO can recognize is that getting regular service to those people, those parcels, would be very, very difficult and very, very expensive. In particular, normal service, like fire service and things. And that's because it's about a mile from the meter to the first service. And that's private water lines already. And Drew spoke to the line going up Highway 1, but there's also, I believe that serves 3 of the 7 or 8. Then it goes cross-country, actually, across agricultural land to serve the remainder. And so it's a very complicated service. It's kind of like something that North Marin has done, sort of recognizing it's in their regular service and probably will always remain that way. So I've asked this of Keene too, if LAFCO, and it makes sense to have it in the sphere as an outside water contract, but I would not want to put any sort of indication in the conditions that we expect the regular service, any reasonable regular service anytime soon. And in fact, I'd be worried that an additional LAFCO board or executive director could think we could do this sitting in his office and make it known that that's should happen to North Marin. And I think that would put an unfair burden on the landowners in particular, because they would have to bear the cost. So I just think recognizing that in this process is important. Is there a possibility, and it may be too late, that in this process the de-annexation or de-attachment could be requested by North Marin and be included in this review?
Certainly, we can take an application when North Marin's ready. And if they want to, do it to parallel the study, we can align the process. The key is it's got to be initiated at North Marin's end.
Right. And would there be potential cost savings and efficiencies in doing that now?
That's up to you. So the commission has discretion under your policies on how you want to apply your fee schedule and to what degree you want staff to do some outreach on this on our dime. So perhaps if there's interest, that would be something that if the full commission said, talk about, we could, work with maybe the policy committee on doing something of that nature.
Can I just add something to your comment, your question? The fact that when you pursued through Senator McGuire, I think that was sort of the hope that he could carry something, and that would have been the most efficient, fastest, least expensive way to do it. That apparently, it's not going to happen that way. So while our district could initiate something as you're suggesting, it has some problems and costly. It could happen, but that's something we probably need to talk about, our options.
What would the cost to the agency be to initiate the detachment application?
So let's just assume it's North Inverness, the Inverness Public Utility District area and the Marshall area. So that alone, you're looking at about, if it was just a normal applicant, a deposit of $10,000. That's separate from hoping that you could find an exemption under CEQA. And you probably could, assuming there are literally no services in Marshall. I think you're safe there. I think you probably can make the same case in the North Inverness. So you're looking at a $10,000 investment in your staff time to process this from start to finish. A lot of it, though, we could probably find some savings in drawing from the service review that we just did. Perhaps the biggest cost is the unknown cost of an election should there be sufficient protest, right? So the benefit of going to a legislature is theoretically getting some kind of expedited pass-through on protest, right? So anytime we do something that doesn't have 100% consent of the landowners, we've got to allow there be a hearing, and if there's enough protests, then we have to have an election. That's the part that would probably need a lot of upfront work between North Marin and LAFCO to figure out, could a proposal for a detachment survive a protest? Because I don't think you would want to invest the resources if you had any indication that the community in Marshall and in North Inverness would push back. You will recall you did get some comments when you were doing the water study from a group from Marshall. It was unclear to me if that group was singular or there was a plural behind it, but you did have at least one person or persons showing up to our meetings concerned about that.
Any other comments? Yeah,
And
Dennis.
so it's not only political, too, the fact that these areas, since 1995, when water restrictions were placed on North Marin Water District as far as their supply out of Alleghenies Creek wells, as all that happening, they really do not have the supplies, the reality, to service these other areas. They just don't have the water supply. And in particular, in the dry year criteria, we just have enough water to serve the existing customers if they how tight the water supply is there. So from a real practical point of view, it does make sense to not have these in the sphere where someone who, some very wealthy person could actually request service and be willing to pay for the pipeline. And once you have the pipeline, it's hard to refuse service to anyone along the way, and suddenly you have a supply issue. So.
Dennis, so the capacity currently is that the current customers have to make a 30% reduction?
The dry year criteria on
The dry
Lake
year
is free.
criteria.
So whenever a dry year's determined by rainfall at Kent Lake or North Municipal Water Storage, the requirement is that you reduce your takes out of your well on Lake Street. And that's, I think, 0.67 is the cubic feet per second, and that's about a 30% reduction for everybody in the district.
Okay, and to kind of move along on this, are there any specific comments we can make to Keene as far as extending the service areas or any changes that can be made aside from what Mr. McIntyre has already addressed?
I think if staff could work with Northern Water and work out those differences, especially around Ocean and Marin, I think Drew is pretty accurate with his statements there. So not that the old town doesn't need something done, but at this point, I think North Marin again is restricted to how much they could even do capacity-wise. So. Closer.
Otherwise, it's not going to appear on the recording well, so when anybody wants to...
You got to swallow the mic.
You have good things to say, we want to make sure we hear it.
I get it at the board all the time. Raise your voice, raise your voice.
Okay, any other comments?
And so
Okay.
I've got clear directions, so I can proceed with the next phase of doing a public review notice in anticipation of working with Drew and his staff in finalizing a report for you to look at for potential action as early as August 10th. And just for staff's benefit, we want to make sure that the commission is okay that our thinking on the public review process is rather than do individual notices to any landowners in B1 or B2, we would just provide a general announcement in the paper, and then maybe if there's a next door or one of those social media, we'll do it that way rather than, again, the expense and perhaps the hornet's nest of reaching out to these property owners when staff is recommending, hey, we're going to punt this anyway. But we will do individual notices to A1 since we are recommending that they go in. So just to make sure everyone's okay with that.
And I'm assuming that you'll be working with Drew before you start sending things out to the world.
I've already reserved a spot in that conference room, and
Yeah,
as
okay.
long as Drew's okay with it,
Because
I'll
part
be
of it's
there.
a little cleanup and part of it's just a better
Yeah.
understanding of what's out there, particularly, Old Town and Oceana Marin. They may be close, but they're vastly different.
Understood.
Okay.
I'm okay with the general noticing. We talked about this, about next door, that I think the LAFCO should get an official account with Nextdoor as an agency. The city of Mill Valley has an official account with Nextdoor through Nextdoor Corporate, and you don't have to go through an individual, I think, which is what we did in the past, was rely on a resident to help us get the word out and get an official thing. So that's something to add to your list of your work plan, is to get an official Nextdoor account, and I think that would be useful for us whenever we have to do any of that stuff.
Okay, so then you have direction on that?
Direction and
Just one other small thing, Keen. When we get things on the dais, could you make sure that those end up in the Dropbox afterwards so that we can have that all together? Those of us who like to keep things electronically.
Great. Then we will move along to item 16, which is readopting the study schedule. And Jeff and Damon and Jack, you were working on that?
Commissioner Connolly and Blanchfield and Burdick were at the last meeting that this was done. Jack cleverly figured out, he showed up right after this heavy lifting was done.
I'll take some credit, though,
But
if you like it.
Vice Chair, I could do a quick, and I think this will be a relatively quick item because I think you are all expecting this. So before the commission is the policy committee's kind of first take at following up on your direction to essentially hit the reset button on our study schedule. And again, the study schedule is our attempt at Marin LAFCO to address this really broad mandate that you have under state law, just so I don't distract anyone, to be in the business of preparing municipal service reviews every 5 years in conjunction with then preparing sphere updates as needed. And of course, you have the luxury of being a small county, but a small county with 65 local agencies under your jurisdiction, so lucky us. So that means we've got a big work plan to tackle. The reason why we have a draft before you to essentially reset the study schedule starting in 17-18 is twofold. First is the current study schedule, which is attachment 1 to your staff report, is set to expire one way or the other next year. Okay, so you have that deadline looming. But then add to that factor 2, and we've talked about this at different iterations, we are woefully behind in the existing study schedule. And as we talked about at some length at the workshop in January, it's creating this disconnect in terms of what your staff is working on versus what the public thinks we're working on. We're essentially 2 years behind that 5-year study schedule. So with those factors in mind, what the policy committee came up with was, okay, let's just reset it. Let's start 17-18 where we are leaving off right now in terms of completed work, with some timing adjustments that we've described in the report, and then towards the back end of the years, add those studies that we had talked about 3 years ago that didn't make it. For example, and I'm sure everyone will be happy about this, at the end of the schedule, we're now due to go back and look at Southern Marin wastewater services, which we are due to do. You know, the study was done, I think LAFCO completed it in 9, and you took action on a consolidation in 11. I wasn't here for it, obviously, but I'm getting a nod of approval from Commissioner Rodoni, another nod of different type from Commissioner Caius. Nevertheless, we have added that to the end of the proposed new study schedule. But I want to emphasize, this is really just kind of resetting the priorities that you talked about at some length a few years ago, continuing to emphasize regional studies as compared to doing individual reviews, continuing to emphasize studies in East Marin. At the end of the day, we're looking at covering 70% of our local agencies. That's a big number for us. Yes, in a perfect world, maybe we would get all 65 in there in a 5-year schedule, but that's just not realistic for this size LAFCO. And I think the commission's been pretty consistent with, let's take the comprehensive approach, let's do quality over quantity, and in that way, we're kind of meeting the intent of the legislation. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have for me. It's a draft. It's really for you to say, yeah, this is good. Send it off to the agencies and see what they say. I'd defer to Commissioner Connolly if he wanted to add anything as well.
I think you covered it well, and would also be interested in input from my fellow commissioner.
I'm really happy to see this cleaned up. I think it's going to be great for us to get, better expectations out to the agencies on what to expect. And like, for example, Strawberry, being really eager, at least they kind of know where they are on the schedule. And then I just had a question about the flood control and storm drainage study. Would that be, would the agencies involved be like, flood control zone 3 or, like that kind of, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Mill Valley is, we just approved the funds to do a flood control master plan. That will go, that will be occurring over the next, year. And actions from that would obviously not be occurring in that year, but Mill Valley has just embarked on that effort and has gotten some funds from Flood Control 3 to pursue that. So I just wanted to have that. So by the time you get to it, there'll be some information there from, at least from the Mill Valley piece of it.
Keen, just a question on City of Santa Fe. I think former commissioner and districting.
Well, that actually was incorporated into our Central Marin wastewater study, in particular looking at consolidation issues, which we are doing.
Thank you.
Okay, any others? Then I'll ask for a motion to approve the draft proposal.
Actually, can I make one suggestion? So CSA 18
Where are you, Damon?
on fiscal year 2017-18 Center Area Study.
So this is attachment to page 232 on the very bottom if you're looking at your packet.
Okay.
Galenas Village.
Yes.
I haven't heard of it referred as that.
Well, interesting. So that is the name that your predecessors in 1983 gave it, and I know that someone else from the county said, "Why are you calling it that?" And I said, "Well, the commission called it that." If there's I've heard another name there too, but we can certainly refine the name to better, like.
I mean, I believe it's confined to Santa Venetia, isn't it?
I worked there many years and I never heard that term used.
Galenas Village. I know, but we should change that.
Warren Nelson's not here, so we could certainly change it.
Santa Venetia.
Santa Venetia
That's
is on,
really
is
funny
number
you say
6,
that because
right?
there is, I had to go to a field
You
there.
have CSA 6 is also Santa Venetia.
And it was Galenas Field, but it was off of North San Pedro.
CSA 18
Is within
is within the
Santa Venetia.
Well, actually, it's actually borders Mount Olive Cemetery.
Oh, it extends over
Yeah.
there, okay.
But we can, and this happened before. The names of the CSAs are not always perfectly recorded in LAFCO lore. So as we perfect this, presumably someone at county, presumably county parks will help us if we got in some of the names wrong. And then as just an overall comment, the commission did this a few years ago, right before I showed up, and it's a good policy. We list these studies here as what we plan on doing, but you still under policy have a process where we come to you with a scope of analysis and say, this is the level of study we anticipate doing. What say you, commission? So it's also an opportunity to whittle down or whittle up as you see fit.
Just as an observation, as somebody who worked at the county for more than 30 years, some of these are very self-evident what they are. There's others, Parks Department takes care of, Public Works, or somebody, San Rafael, and sometimes the county auditor and treasurer, they can't figure out what some of these are themselves.
All right, so here's a compromise. I'm looking at the Marin County Parks website. Las Galenas.
As opposed to Galenas Village, just call it Las Galenas? Okay.
It's a CSA 18 for Las Galenas.
By the time this comes back in August, such a change will be made.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'll ask if I can have a motion to accept this draft. All in favor?
And you will entertain a little bit of constructive input about
Absolutely. And we'll
cleaning up some of the labeling.
I mean, I might not agree with you, Commissioner, but
Oh, I'm sure you will.
cross that bridge.
Let's move on to the legislative report.
So very quickly on my end and on behalf of the Ledge Committee, who was dutifully attended a meeting just late last week, this item is for the commission just to be caught up on the bills that are going around Sacramento that directly or indirectly impact LAFCOs. And I think we talked about at least one bill at our last meeting that you took a position on. This time, the committee ultimately identified just 3 bills of interest that we wanted to just make sure the commission was aware of. And then also on one particular, make sure that you consider a recommended position. Of the bills that are going around, it's fair to say that it's somewhat of a quiet year at LAFCO in terms of legislation, because a lot of the focus is going in on this ongoing Little Hoover hearing process that technically is focused in on special districts, but as we provide in the agenda report, as a virtue of their glue in on special districts, they've fixated themselves on the adequacy or perhaps lack of adequacy of our oversight. In fact, I'm going to a hearing on June 22nd on this very topic. But the one bill that we definitely wanted to get on the commission's radar is Senate Bill, let me go there, I think it's 448. Hold on one second. Yes, Senate Bill 448, and if you're looking at your agenda packet, I'm summarized on page 235. So this is an interesting bill, and this actually came out in part because of Little Hoover's hearings that began last year, and if approved and as written, it would create a brand new mandate for you and your 57 LAFCOs across the state. It would say to you that if you have an inactive district, and as inactive is defined in this legislation, you are directed to initiate on your dime the dissolution of that agency. And while you will conduct a hearing, I don't really think the hearing would amount to much because there's no discretion. You are going to dissolve that district. So that hearing may potentially just be kind of an awkward yell fest. But nevertheless, the idea here is the legislature, just whether you agree or not, has this premise that there's too many special districts in California. And in this particular attempt, there's a belief that there are too many inactive districts that really are not transacting any business on the behalf of the public. So this is, a directive of LAFCO. Well, you should have been doing this all along over the last 20 years. You haven't, so we're just going to take the discretion away from you. And if a district meets this definition of inactive, you're doing it. Cal LAFCO, has opposed the bill, although kind of a soft oppose. The bill has been amended quite a bit to Cal LAFCO's liking to deal with some other draconian issues. And right now, Cal LAFCO's big ask is, hey, if you're going to amend this any further, we would be responsive if you give us a little more discretion in maybe not going down the path of a dissolution, but maybe another type of reorganization, a consolidation or a merger. The committee met and agreed that, if there were inactive districts that met this definition, well, yeah, maybe they should go away. I think what the committee would like to see, though, is at least there be some kind of noticing process that, LAFCO would provide a heads up or a notice to District X saying, you seem to be meeting the definition of inactive, what say you? And give them a chance to respond one way or the other and have the discretion to decide, yes, they're inactive, or no, we don't think they're inactive. So that's our big comment. So the request is send an opposed unless amended position, but make that point. Say, hey, give the districts a chance to make their case.
That's assuming you can find some entity
Yeah.
/ individual to notice in the first place.
That's true. So part of the challenge, of course, is if they're an inactive district, the noticing may be challenging because they may not be necessarily there. But at least you could document, hey, we made an attempt for, District X. There was someone we tracked down, and he did not give us sufficient
Do you have any
responses.
sense? I mean, do we have a handful in Marin, or I doubt
I don't
there's
think there
many.
would be any in Marin that I would say out loud. I think maybe in my mind there might be one or two, but I think this bill, and Vice Chair Condon actually flagged this, so Wykowski, if that's the way you would pronounce his last name, is a assembly member or state senator out of kind of Contra Costa Alameda. Fremont. And that is at least in earshot of the famed Eden Health Valley Hospital District that's had all these problems over the last few years. In fact, there was a bill last year that just proposed just to get rid of that district on its own. So he has been experienced. I think he also is a former Alameda LAFCO commissioner, so he has some LAFCO experience in his mind. So, but I think it's representative of what this Little Hoover Commission is generating. There are going to be other bills like this that speak to either making LAFCOs more proactive by choice or perhaps by edict.
They may have to better define inactive because the 600 cemetery districts might.
Yeah, what Dennis says is, you know, it was hospital districts and cemetery districts, and, you know, it still might be a public purpose. It's just that they don't have that organizational structure. So just to wipe them out, there still may be that public need, and that might be kind of the challenge for LAFCO. One,
Actually, I was joking, but you're right.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to get a quick take, and thank you, Keen, for telling us basically you're not foreseeing anything in Marin, but I think statewide there might be some challenges.
So with that, you know, being our main focus, there were a couple other bills that we flagged in the agenda report. I'd be happy to go into more detail. Assembly Bill 1728 came out of local government committee, again influenced by Little Hoover. This really would just kind of promote some best practices for healthcare districts. Healthcare districts are in particular in the kind of the eye of the storm of Little Hoover because of Eden Valley. And so what this bill would do is require that at a minimum they establish some uniform standards on how they adopt budgets. Fair enough. But the reason why it's of interest to us is it also requires that, or it encourages, it did initially require, now it has been amended down to encourage that they post their MSR from LAFCO on their website. A lot of LAFCOs were not happy with this because unlike Marin, they had not yet done their MSR on a healthcare district, so it was a little awkward, but I think we've moved beyond that. I will say, and I apologize to the legislative committee, we didn't talk about this part of it, but Cal LAFCO would like this bill to be amended further to address a blind spot in our apportionment process as it relates to healthcare districts. So healthcare districts have a great lobbyist, and somehow they figured out many years ago to essentially be exempted from the annual contribution process at LAFCO so long as their operating net after they take care of everything else shows a negative. So for example, Marin Healthcare, which is our healthcare district here, has not contributed to Marin LAFCO, at least since I've been here, and that's the same story in most counties. A lot of the water and sewer districts aren't too wild about this inequity because they're obviously paying their LAFCO costs. So one of the things we're trying to work on is making a fair allocation process. But we're recommending a support position with a letter from staff just because, hey, at the end of the day, it can only help. Last but not least, and I won't spend too much time on this, that we flagged a bill out of Solano County. Why would we flag a bill that was specific to Solano County? Because it was establishing an expedited process to form a district outside of the LAFCO purview, which offended me a great deal. I think the other committee members were less offended by this, but I wanted to make sure they were aware of it.
We're tolerant.
Yes. But at the end of the day, I did talk to Cal LAFCO, and what the committee's comment was, well, an individual LAFCO shouldn't be commenting on another LAFCO bill, but we should ask our statewide association to kind of rein in this kind of thing. And I did talk to the Cal LAFCO ED, and they certainly said they agreed, and you know, they were going to certainly take an opposed position. They just hadn't got into it. So with that, I don't think we need to do any more follow-up. So I'll defer to members McEntee, Baker, and Kais if they wanted to add anything more to the discussion.
So for the committee and Keen, a couple questions. One, I noticed Senate Bill 435 on the Williamson Act that they're reducing the amount paid per acre. I think that might be significant here in Marin. Are we taking a sort of position on that? Or?
Well, it's interesting. So as I read this bill, this is the Dodd bill, he's trying to reestablish the funding at a lesser rate than what historically had been done. So actually, Senator Dodd is trying to reestablish a funding source, but in order to get it passed, he's lowering the threshold.
Okay, thank you. And the other item, which I think Lou and I in particular recently experienced, is AB 939, which is creating independent special district selection committee pursuant to a nomination election process. So Lou and I attended one call for candidates, which is down in Tiburon at the fire district. Right. Otherwise, it's just kind of a free-for-all that here in Marin, with all the special districts, it's just, and I think there's some comment back that staff reflected that a lot of people aren't engaged in the process, don't necessarily know the candidates or what's at hand, and there's some reluctance to even vote. So I'd just like to see what your comments are on that. I think there was a special district group here in Marin maybe about 10 years ago. And Dennis, I think, has chimed in many times about the amount of efforts with that, and if you think this bill is a good idea.
Well, isn't there already an item on the project plan that addresses that to some degree?
It admittedly is, I think, at the lowest priority just based on our unsuccessful efforts of late. But you're right. So every county that has special districts on LAFCO, by law, are to have a special district selection committee. I don't know what happened to the one here in Marin. I just don't. So we end up doing, among other things, the noticing. I think the bill you're referencing, and I apologize, I have to better read up on it, would create an incentive and an expedited process for those LAFCOs that don't have special district representation yet, but want to allow special districts to join. For example, Napa doesn't have special districts, YOLO doesn't have special districts, and they're trying to incentivize a process to let special districts join LAFCO if they choose to, which is a good idea, but it's also a pay-for-play scenario, so they would automatically be responsible for a third of the cost of a LAFCO.
So about 14 years ago, when I first got onto LAFCO, there was a fairly strong special districts association, but at that time, we only really sort of pre-selected people for the process. It was done the same way by the nomination and ballot procedure. And we never did take the function on ourselves like cities do, city mayors and city council people do. And it was quite difficult to keep that organization going. It was only literally as strong as the president would be. And then subsequent presidents maybe never called meetings, never had them, and then the whole thing fell apart. But from my point, I think the process we use now, a little cumbersome for staff, does work.
Although it prevents Southern Marin candidates from ever getting elected because there's no voting block down in Southern Marin. But that's a different subject.
That's the difference. We'll change that. That's me.
Okay, so Keenan,
The political
you
consultant.
will send on letters.
Yeah, so if the commission would just take an approval of action, alternative action 1, that will be my direction to send those letters as you see fit.
So moved.
Thank you. We need a second.
I'm sorry, just modification. Should we comment on the Williamson Act in support of that as well? Again, since it really worked to protect ag and open space area here in Marin, I think it affects us greatly.
We certainly could. Admittedly, I was so upset about Senate Bill 365 from the same author. I was just reeling from all of this. But no, if the commission would like to go on record, we could certainly provide a letter.
Yeah, good. And so we have a second on that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, great. Thanks, Keen. Okay, number 18, election of chair and vice chair.
I had nothing to do with this, so this is just by policy. Every May or meeting thereafter, you appoint a chair and vice chair.
Okay.
Does anyone know if Chairman Blanchfield wants to continue or not, and what his plans are?
I expect that he's going to continue.
I think that was his conveyance that he would like to remain as chair of the commission's soft edge.
Well, I would nominate Jeff Blanchfield as chair.
I'll second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay,
And I'd like to nominate Carla Condon as vice chair.
Second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. I'm honored for that. Thank you. Keen.
The only thing I want to add is, hopefully, this is the last paper agenda packet any of you will ever see from LAFCO. We are going to, Commissioner Baker, we'll work with you. I will personally work with you on this one.
Someone just like this product.
No, I can understand, but we will be working out the details in short order very soon. Good. That is it. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. And before I turn it over to Craig, are there any commissioner announcements or requests? Okay, if not, I'm going to ask Craig to adjourn the meeting tonight, and he has some words to share.
So I asked our executive officer and our acting chair today if we could adjourn tonight's meeting in honor of John T. Jack Knox. So if you don't know that person, I'll read a few things. He recently passed on, and he's noted in California as one of California's greatest legislators. Some say the greatest legislator. He died April 3rd at the age of 92. He was born September 30th, 1924. He served the United States in the U.S. Army Air Forces World War II. He served the citizens of California as a member of California's Assembly from 1960 to 1980 and served as Assembly Speaker Pro Tem. He was a driving force in the 1970 creation of the California Environmental Quality Act. He is known as a liberal Democrat, but was able to work with Republican friend Senator Bob Beverly to get the then Governor Ronald Reagan to sign the act. This act requires environmental review for all construction projects. He was the creator of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission and saved the Bay from dramatic downsizing as plans were afoot to fill in large parts of it, including most of the stretch between Richmond and Berkeley, where some sought an airport would be built. There was rampant filling of the bay at that time and fought hard to get that built. He formed a select committee over 7 years, reformed the Corporate Security Act, rewrote the entire corporations code, and added a set of nonprofit corporation laws, and created a number of public finance agencies to issue public construction bonds. He personally argued before the California State Supreme Court to validate local sales taxes for highway financing. There are now more than 20 self-help counties building roads. He's noted as the most fiscally responsible member of the Assembly. He co-authored the Knox-Keene Act, which established the regulatory framework for HMOs and prepaid health plans. He traveled to Washington and almost single-handedly brought the extension of the 580 freeway through Richmond and Santa Fe. And lastly, he is the creator of the Knox-Nesbitt Act of 1963, which helped establish local agency formation commissions. So I'd like to adjourn tonight's meeting in honor of John T. Jack Knox, and there will be a celebration of his life at the Knox Miller Park in Richmond on Sunday. I believe it's at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, Craig. So with that, our meeting is adjourned until August 10th. And so enjoy this summer, and we'll see everybody on August 10th.
Thank you.